You should have done
Threw me off guard.
Okay, so we're doing we're in the book of James right now, and we started chapter 2, a section in chapter 2. We've already begun the first few verses of that study. So as we go through that, we're going to see that the beginning parts of chapter 1. Well, let me back up a couple of spaces if I can. So James is written by the brother of Jesus, the half brother of Jesus, James. And he, after Paul came down from his first missionary journey, he made a trek down to Jerusalem, where James was the leader of that Jerusalem church there. And they had a discussion about Paul's ministry, and James gave him the green light. Yeah, that's awesome. You do you, man. Get going. If God sent you on this path, go for it. And then after that, shortly after that, he wrote this book. And he wrote it to believers. He wrote it as a Jew to other Jews, but he wrote it as a believer to other believers. And that's the connect point that we make from it. And here we saw in chapter 1 that he talked about trials. Trials are difficult things that are allowed to happen in our lives that help strengthen our faith. It's not there to crush us or to cause problems for us. It's there to strengthen our faith. And then there are those things which are temptations. Temptations are not allowed by God or anything. They take root and begin to grow in our own hearts, from our own lusts, from our own desires. We want these things so bad, we don't care what we have to do to get it, type of a scenario. And when that happens, unfortunately, bad things happen. And James even goes so far as to show a Jewish kind of an idea, or a Jewish ideology, that if the life cycle of a temptation, once it grows and becomes fully mature, it brings forth death. And that death is like a death-like lifestyle. It's one that's not committed to the Lord, and it's one that's just selfish. And unfortunately, that doesn't really go very far in this world. So dedicating ourselves to God is the key here. In chapter 2, he shifts gears now, and he's getting a little bit more practical, which is good for us. And the first big topic, and I love James because he hits no nonsense, kind of gets in there, hits it, and then moves on to the next subject. And the subjects that he picks are very, very important to us, very prudent to us, because there's still problems that we have today. I wish we could say over the past couple thousand years that we grew up a little bit, but I don't know that that's the case. So these things are still applicable to us today. The thing he's talking about is partiality. Partiality. So we talked about partiality. That word is like receiving the face. It's looking on the outside. You look at somebody on the outside, and by that you make some kind of judgment call, and that judgment call affects not only the way you think about that thing or that person, but it also affects the way you act about that thing or that person. And we went into verses 2 through 4 last time, and it gave us kind of a picture of what partiality or prejudice looks like. 2 through 4, if there should come into your assembly a man with gold rings, fine apparel, and there should also come a poor man with filthy clothes, and you pay attention to the one wearing fine clothes and say to him, you sit here in a good place, and you say to the poor man, you stand here or sit at my footstool, you have not shown partiality among yourselves, but become judges with evil thoughts. Here, I had a bigger diagram, and I moved it over here because I know how much you guys would miss it if it wasn't there. So I just kind of made it smaller over here. It gives an idea, because he's a Jew talking to other Jews. He's talking about what this means, what this would look like in a synagogue. And that the reason being is because it says there in verse 2, for if there should come into your assembly. That word assembly is the word that they use for synagogue. So he's painting a picture here as a Jew to other Jews. And he's talking about the synagogue. And I told you that I visited many of those in Jerusalem. and all throughout Turkey and things. And there was a separation. There was always a separation. The men would sit in the middle. The women and the children would always sit off to the side or in the balconies. And here you see a guy that's obviously loaded, and he moves forward. Hey, let's get you to the front of the line, type of thing. And then a man who is not somebody who's obviously poor, he tells him, just stand over here and be out of the way. Okay. And that's kind of a bum deal. In verses 5 through 11, that's what we're going to talk about today, is verses 5 through 11. Verses 5 through 11. Because he gives another, he goes a little bit deeper into the scenario. James is kind of that no-nonsense guy. He gets a subject, he gets into it, he hits it hard, and then he moves to the next subject. Here is kind of an interesting thing because we see him shift gears a little bit, kind of slows down a little bit, because he wants to kind of really envelop this thing. And I think this is me talking. Obviously, it's not necessarily here, but this is me talking. As James is a Jew, and he's talking to other Jews. Jews, unfortunately, have this very haughty, very proud kind of thinking. Their thought process is because they are God's chosen people that they're better than you are. Just because of that. Maybe they don't even know the law very well. Maybe they go to the synagogue, every Sunday and don't really pay attention to things or whatever that looks like. But just because I'm a Jew makes me better than you. And I think maybe the reason why James is kind of going a little bit slower in this part, he's kind of shifting gears, downshifting so he can slow down and look at this scenario once again, is because I think he really wants to make this point clear. Because this is something culturally that the Jews follow and the Jews find in their life. Unfortunately, we find it now in the 21st century also, not just in the first century. But here we see that kind of a thing. So here, in verses 5 through 11, we see him kind of slowing down. He wants to explain this a little bit more and see why this kind of behavior is not cool. And I think he does it in 3 different ways. So let's go ahead and we'll go to the passage here and we'll kind of read it so that we can gain some perspective on here. Starting in verse 5, we just got done talking about, hey, go stand over here or sit here at my footstool, showing partiality and those things. And it says there, you have not shown partiality. You're becoming that person's judge, jury, and executioner is basically what it's saying. And that's not cool because those thoughts are evil. You've already deemed that person unworthy, and that's not cool. And what we're going to look at here in the first thing that we're going to look at is to make sure that honor is being served. And I'll get into that in a minute. Verse 5 through 11. Listen, my beloved brethren. Once again, he says the word brethren. What does that mean? Believers. Listen, my beloved brethren. Has God not chosen the poor of this world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom, which he promised to those who loved him? But you have dishonored the poor man. Do not the rich oppress you and drag you into the courts? Do they not blaspheme the noble name by which you are called? If you really fulfill the royal law according to the scripture, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, you do well. But if you show partiality, you commit sin and are convicted by the law as a transgressor. For whoever shall keep the whole law and yet stumble in one point, he is guilty of all. For he who said, do not commit adultery, also said, do not commit murder. Now, if you do not commit adultery, but you do commit murder, you have become a transgressor of the law. Let's stop right there. A lot of this stuff, hopefully, will jog some memories about our church service that we've been going through with the Good Samaritan. Some of these passages here mirror that and emulate that, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. But I think that there are 3 ways that James is presenting this idea of partiality as being uncool. This is not what you're supposed to do. This is not how you're supposed to live. And I think he does it in 3 ways. The first way, I think he starts off with one is theological. Theological. That's all. I got some room over there. Theological, right? All right. Theological. Theological is the first thing. Look at verse 5. Look at verse 5. Listen, my beloved brethren. Has God not chosen the poor of this world to be rich in faith and heirs of his kingdom, which he promised to those who loved him? This is an important statement because he is grabbing a whole bunch of different scriptures and throwing it in there and getting us to understand Old Testament scriptures, because New Testament didn't exist at that time. But Old Testament scriptures, and really just pouring it in and getting it on top of all these things, as well as some of the things that Jesus has said as well. So he wants to make this very, very clear. God doesn't show partiality. He just got off of verse 4, which says you're becoming a judge. You're looking at somebody and you're judging them. And that's an evil thought to do that. And then in verse 5, he says, God has chosen the poor of this world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom, which he promised to those who love him. This is telling of that concept of the rich and the poor having that partiality. You look at somebody who's rich, you think they're good. You look at somebody who's poor, maybe not so good. It doesn't have the character of the person on the inside has very little to nothing to do with what's on the outside. Okay, nothing. But here we see that this is something that we need to understand, that theologically we as believers need to honor what God honors. Let that sink in for a sec. We need to honor what God honors. Every person is made in the image of God. And it's a little bit arrogant, maybe? That's a harsh word, but sadly it fits. It's a little bit arrogant for us as fellow created beings of God to look at another fellow created being of God and not honor them for what and who they are. That person was made in the very image of God. And even though they may socially not have the same standing as another person, they still have great value to God. God came and died, and Jesus came and died and rose again for that person just as much as he did for the guy wearing gold rings. And he did it because they are in the very image of God. That is the truth. That's the theological reason. And Paul really works that out in First Corinthians chapter 1. One of these days we'll go through First Corinthians. We'll go through Corinthians for you there, Vivian. The Apostle Paul really develops this in 1 Corinthians 1. 26 through 29, it says, "For consider your calling, brethren, that you are not many wise, that you were not many wise according to the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble. But God has chosen the foolish things of this world to shame the wise, and God has chosen the weak things of the world to shame the things which are strong. And the base things of this world to despise God has chosen these things which are not, so that he may nullify the things which are, so that no man may boast before God." It's not who you are, it's whose you are, right? There's honor that God has for individuals. And if you look at this, we kind of can see the concept of the poor and the rich. It says here, God has chosen the poor of this world to be rich. All right. This concept here of poor and rich, we can look at that in the English and see it very easily as being two contrasts, right? Somebody who's poor, somebody who's rich. In the Greek, that word poor means destitute. It doesn't just mean that you don't have as much money as the other person. It means destitute. It means destitute of wealth, destitute of honor. It doesn't just give the idea of monetary poorness. It has destitute of honor as well. It's a word that they would use for someone that's begging, begging for food or begging for money. Somebody who sits in front of the temple or the synagogue and beg for alms type of a thing. That's the word that they would use there, this poor, right? This person is destitute, all right? So it's not just somebody who's low on money or somebody who doesn't have as much as another person. It's talking about someone on the far end of the spectrum, okay? The rich guy is yet another far end of the spectrum. He isn't just rich. He doesn't just have money or maybe a little bit more money than other people. He has abundant wealth. It means that he is abundantly supplied with wealth. This only gives the idea of monetary wealth, not honor, whereas the poor one gives a concept of honor. So you have on this far end somebody who, is dishonored because he begs for things, and this person that never has to beg for anything ever in his life. Two so far ends of the spectrum, right? And it says here, yeah.
But those people that are poor don't really want to be poor.
Well, no, but he's using it as an example.
Oh.
He's using it as an example because we're talking about partiality, okay? How you view one person versus how you view another person. Not their social standing or how they got to that social standing, the idea that we look at them based off of a social standing.
We're all guilty of that.
Oh, for sure. So here we see that. So here, the concept of two opposites, so opposite. And Paul works that out, and he says that, in that 1 Corinthians passage, you can read it again at your leisure. But for those of us who were not mighty, those of us who are not noble, God chose us anyway and made us understand that, you've ever watched those Hallmark movies where this girl, finds out she's a princess of some weird, nation or some country you'd never even heard of. And it's this really rich country, and she's some kid in school or something, and she finds out she's a princess, and she's, revered amongst other people and all this kind of stuff. That's our story. We were the poor, humiliated, destitute people because we were sinful. And yet God showed mercy on us. God came to our side. We're going to talk about in our church service. But here we see that in that transformation, in that theological transformation, because he honors what we may not honor, he has taken them from one extreme to the other. You realize I'm going to take these guys over here that you think so poorly of, and these guys are going to be eternal heavenly beings one day. That's something, right? Go from the lowliest place on earth to the grandest place in heaven. That's what these guys are going to be. And you look at them and say, oh, they're not worthy. You need to honor what God honors. That's the theological part that I think he talks about in verse 5, is that principle that we are all in that family together, and we need to work together in that. It's not who you are, it's whose you are. Second thing he talks about, verses 6 and 7. He talks about a logical reason. After he talks about verse 5, and he gives kind of a theological point, you need to honor what God honors. In verse 6, he says, but you have dishonored the poor man. Do not the rich oppress you and drag you into the courts? Do they not blaspheme the noble name which you are called? Here there's a lot of unwritten things. If you read between the lines, you can see a lot of unwritten things. All right. First off, it says, but you are dishonored, but you have dishonored the poor man. That's what we talked about. We got to honor what God honors. The second thing is, do not the rich oppress you and drag you into the courts. What is that telling you? Kind of try and read between the lines. We're talking about two groups of people. And he's talking about, don't the rich people drag you, literally says, drag you into the courts. What does that tell you?
They think they're better than us.
They think you're better. They think they're better. And do the poor people participate in that process? No, they're the victims of that process. Why? Because they think they're better. Because they have money and those people don't, they elevate themselves to a point where they're above other people. And that becomes who they are. That's their identity. They honor themselves. All right.
Now,
And yeah,
now, to a certain point or to a certain degree, do you believe or do you think that Jesus could have been in a lower category than some of the people on earth, even though he was sin free and stuff like that, and they kind of looked down on him? Or do you think he may have been one who was looked above everybody, in the richer group?
you mean just monetarily?
Yeah.
Just
I
monetarily.
mean, him out walking above, his friends, family members, and, the public and everything like that. How do you think he felt, or how do you think the people felt about him?
Well, that's an interesting question because all those people that followed him and listened to him, revered him. He didn't have money,
Right.
but they revered him. There were those that were Pharisees and Sadducees, the followers of the law that followed him and listened to him, and they despised him for the same reason. Because of the things he said had authority and power and strength, right? Monetarily speaking, there are lots of times during the Bible where you find one of my most famous and favorite stories in the Bible is some guys, some Pharisees, Sadducees, some lawyers and stuff. They're hassling Jesus about how they haven't paid the temple tax and stuff like that, and Jesus doesn't have money, right? Well, there were times when he fed the 5,000. Like he gathered his disciples came together, and they said, and Jesus said, well, we need to, it's getting dark. We need to just feed these people and they can just stay here. And the disciples were like, dude, how are we going to feed all these people? Like, seriously, do you see how many people are here? You know what I'm saying? Like, how are we going to feed these people? Don't worry about it. I got you covered. Loaves and the fishes. Boom, 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 boom. Right? Cost zero money. But the impact was huge. In the story, guys are giving him a hard time about paying a simple tax. And he's like, do I need to pay in my father's house? That type of thing. He goes, you're Jewish. You got to pay your temple tax. Fine. So he goes and tells some of his fisherman buddies, go down to the river, cast your line out, and you're going to catch a fish. When you catch that fish, you open up his mouth. It's going to have enough money to pay for all of our taxes. Right? So money wasn't an issue for him. Right? And he traveled around just like everybody traveled around. He traveled around a lot, so he probably had to travel light. It's not like us. I travel a lot myself, and I'll go out to the West Coast, or I'll go up north to Michigan or something like that, and I'm gone for a couple of days. I take like a suitcase. I have like 3 sets of clothes. I bring extra underwear because my mom taught me to do that. Stuff like that, right? I have a big bag that I check. I don't carry that sucker around. Why would I carry that thing around? I check the bag, right? These guys didn't do that. These guys walked all over the place. So when I tell you that sometimes, when I was talking in the church service that sometimes your clothes are some of the most valuable things you have, it's because you probably only had like 1 or 2 outfits. You know what I mean? While you were wearing one, you washed the other one. When it was clean, you swapped it out, and then that was your process. You know what I'm saying? So monetarily speaking, he didn't have much.
And I think he probably was looked down on at times because he hung out with the poor.
Oh yeah, but we do know that he hung out with rich and poor alike.
And another thing too, look where he was born at.
Oh yeah.
He was born in a
Once again, that's
barn,
right.
in a cattle stable,
Right.
amongst the animals and everything.
Right.
So I mean, he could have easily went to the finest motel or hotel and been born there, but I mean, it was not his. I guess it was not his thing to do that or
Right.
whatever.
Yeah, he could have been he's the son of God, man. He could have been born anywhere to any family he wanted, and yet he picked a woman that was of good Christian character. You know what I mean? Good godly character. Shouldn't say Christian. He wasn't born yet. Good godly character, right? And that's what it was. He was born to a man who was a carpenter. Was he a rich man? No, he was just a normal guy, right? And so he learned normal guy things. Jesus was a carpenter. He probably learned the trade of his father, which, his stepfather, which was, Joseph. So it doesn't talk a lot about him building stuff. You know what I mean? Or was he a good carpenter? Was he not a good carpenter? It talks about him traveling around a lot. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
I think, to add to what I was saying on this, it's kind of funny because, I say funny, but he was born in the state.
Mhm.
He was, raised by a blue collar type man.
Right.
He didn't have the money,
Right.
but he could have. He could
Yeah.
have been in the richest palaces. When he died and resurrected, like we were talking about yesterday, he could have came back resurrected with a perfect body.
Oh yeah.
But he came back with his
With scars. Right.
You know,
And all those things were to prove a point.
right.
So he was born into meager surroundings because he wanted to show that he was a simple man with a simple job. And that was to save mankind, not to be a carpenter. He lived a sinless life and experienced all the joys and the frustrations that we do, right? Died and rose again, which is a terrible thing, to die. Full scope experience of the human thing. But the way he died is also important too. He was born in meager circumstances, and he died horrifically. If he were to just come, prophecy says I'm going to die, and then I'll be back 3 days later. If he just disappeared for a couple of days and then came back and said, "Hey, I was dead." Oh, great. Like people go, "Yeah, sure you were." Right? He had to die on the cross, beat half to death in a very public way, so that when people saw him, and Bible tells us that at one time he was there for 40 days after he resurrected. He was there for 40 days before he ascended. Just one time, he was seen by over 500 people at one time. So imagine what 40 days look like. He probably appeared in front of hundreds and hundreds of people, right? How can you look at him and remember what he looked like when he was hanging on that cross and go, wow, how is it that would not move you in some way? I saw you die. I saw you hanging on that cross. I saw what they did to you. You know what I mean? So everything everything made a point. You know what I'm saying? So monetarily speaking, that isn't something that, you got a guy like Matthew who is super wealthy, but he got his money in a not so great way. So he turned away from that. You know what I mean? There were other people Jesus came across that were rich, young rich kid, and he says, if you really want to follow me, go sell all your stuff and then come follow me. And he goes, well, I don't want to do that. You know what I'm saying? I don't want to do that. Why? Because he probably looks at his life and goes, well, you're walking around with dirty clothes and I don't want to do that. Well, sorry, dude. That's what it's like. That's the gig. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know if that answers your question, but there are instances of both things, right? It says that Jesus went and met with the poor. That means that those people probably were in an economic state less than him, right?
Right.
But he also met with people that were rich,
Right.
people that were economically greater than him. You get what I mean? So,
The sick and the
yeah, and the sick and the lepers. Yeah, for sure. So, so monetarily speaking, it never speaks tremendously to him being anything other than what he is. You know what I'm saying?
Just like it says too. I mean, the rich people are not going to buy their way to heaven.
No.
The poor people, they don't have a lot, but I mean, they can go to heaven just like anybody can, as long as they commit that they are a sinner and they, ask Jesus to come in.
I know we unfortunately in America, I hate to do that, but we are a little spoiled. You go to other countries and there's kids running around in dirt fields with no shoes on playing soccer, and they're the happiest kids in the world because that's their world. That's what they know. You know what I mean? That type of thing. My kid, if I see him without his phone in his hand, I'm shocked. I'm like, are you okay? Did you know what I'm saying? it's not that bad, but you get what I'm saying, but anyway, okay. Any other thoughts or comments, questions, observations? He's getting in here, he's getting into this concept, and he's the first and biggest piece of the puzzle is theological. It's to honor what God honors. Okay, that's the first part. We'll get to the other two later.
I didn't mean to throw you.
Oh no, you're good. No, discussion's great. I want that. I want people to just talk about stuff for sure. Absolutely.
It's all part of
Because it's all part of the picture. It's all part of the thing. Then, all right. Well, good. Okay, we'll pray. We'll be done. Since we're done. Yeah, we're done. Oh, I'm on time. Look at that. Dear Lord, thank you so much for this opportunity we had to look at your word and have some really good discussion. Dear Lord, thank you so much for the sacrifice you give. As a matter of fact, in our church service, we're going to talk about this concept of richness and poor and depravity in our church service. So help us to truly honor you as we get into our church service and keep what we've learned here, that we need to truly honor what you honor. Your love was unconditional, and it had no restraints in who it touched. And in that same space, you've called us to be that same way. Dear Lord, help us. Bless us. Open up our hearts more than our minds and our eyes, that we would be able to see those in need and be able to respond to them. Thank you, dear Lord, for all that you've given to us, and help us to have, once again, a great church service. And we ask it in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
That's something.